Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is you're watching this. Welcome to Left Side of the Aisle. I'm your host, Larry Erickson, and for the next half an hour, I'm going to be talking about something that I hope you will take to heart. One long extended rant. If you have any reactions to it, you certainly can email them to me directly. My personal email, whoviating, WHOVIATING @AOL.com. If you didn't catch that, go to my website, Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, it's called, and the URL will be here a couple of times during the show. And you can get you can leave a comment there if you like, or you can get the email address if you happen to not get it here. If you do send me email, I just have two real requests rather. One is to include something in the subject line that makes it clear this is about the show, it's not spam. And two, to be a little patient about getting an answer because I really stink at dealing with email. So, with that out of the way, let's get to it. Like I said, one long extended rant this week, and we'll see how this goes. All right, the primaries are over. Well, actually, there's one more. There's a Washington, D.C.'s primary on June 14th, but essentially they're over. But I want to start talking about this a little bit back. A week or two ago, a couple of news outlets, including MSNBC and some others, let it be known that they intended to call the presidential nomination race for Hillary Clinton as soon as the polls in New Jersey closed on June 7th, not even waiting for the polls to close in California 3 hours later. Which was more than bad enough, more than offensive enough, and in fact ticked off more than enough people. But as it turned out, they didn't even wait for the polls to open. Monday, the day before the primaries, AP declared that based on its survey of superdelegates, Hillary Clinton had a majority of total delegates and therefore had the nomination. So, of course, several major news outlets had to immediately scream the news about this in the desperate hope that they managed to say this a couple of seconds before some other outlet did. And so, by an act of what is truly gross, turnout suppressing, voter suppressing, journalistic, and I'm using that word very advisedly, journalistic malfeasance, Hillary Clinton was anointed the Democratic candidate for president. And I say anointed because, those superdelegates still have not voted, and they will not vote until next month. So you can't say she's been voted into the role. And all of this, despite the fact that the Democratic National Committee, of all people, the DNC, was telling news outlets a couple of weeks ago that they should not count the superdelegates in their delegate totals because it gave a misleading perception of the actual state of the race between the two. It was much like calling, and not just predicting, but calling the outcome of an election based on pre-election day polls. No matter. The news business, with a strong emphasis on business, is far more focused on being first than on doing what is supposed to be their job. All right, but for the moment, because I'm sure I'll have more than enough cause, more than enough cases in the future to talk about how we are uninformed, malinformed, and misinformed by our corporate media. So for the moment, I'm going to leave that aside because the political reality is that, yes, while Clinton is not the nominee yet and shouldn't be called that yet, she surely will be the nominee once the ballots are counted at the convention. That's simply the political reality of the situation. And by the way, quick sidebar here, something I wanted to point out that I found interesting. When Clinton is formally nominated, it will be an historic event. She will be the first woman to have been nominated for president by a major political party. But somehow it hasn't felt, the announcement that she secured the nomination hasn't felt historic. It hasn't really been treated as historic by the media, including the Clinton-friendly media, of which there's a great deal. It hasn't been treated like such a truly big historic thing, which has been disappointing, understandably, to several women commentators. But personally, I think there's an upside. Maybe it's because she came so close to getting the nomination last time. Maybe it's because we're just so familiar with Hillary Clinton. But even so, it just seems that for an awful lot of people, the idea of a woman president just doesn't seem that outlandish, doesn't seem that odd. It seems like, okay, it's the ordinary turn of events. Which, when you think about it, is actually a good thing. Anyway, getting to the issue. The end of the primaries brings us right up against the question I have been talking about for weeks now: what now? Senator Jeff Merkley, who is the only sitting senator who endorsed Bernie Sanders, told the Washington Post that the Democrats will be absolutely united in making sure that Donald the Rump doesn't become president. But he also said in that same interview that Clinton needed to learn from Sanders' campaign, saying that Clinton, and I'm quoting him here, will not win in November without a deep and profound and passionate understanding of the issues that have so moved the grassroots in America. And the real question before us now is, will we see that? Will we see that profound and passionate understanding of these issues? And the truth is, frankly, I doubt it. I doubt we will. Because the fact is, many of those issues are ones in which that party establishment and the broader social, political, and economic elite of which it's part, these are issues in which they have little to no interest, and in a number of cases they are issues which they oppose because they see them as a threat to their position, their profit, or both. In the face of that threat that these issues presented to their position, the political and economic establishment has quickly closed ranks around the preferred candidate of that same establishment. That candidate that, even though they might not be great fans of everything this candidate says, it's still the one that establishment feels comfortable with. The one that establishment is confident might rearrange the apples on the cart, but will not upset it. And that candidate is Hillary Clinton. That's why, in the words of the Clinton campaign itself, they wanted to disqualify Bernie Sanders. Not just defeat him, disqualify him. So disqualify him and his supporters and the issues that they diffused for, all to diffuse that threat. But having said that, again, I have to say again, this is not about Bernie Sanders. It never was. Bernie Sanders has been advocating the cause of social and economic justice for decades now, but he is not the alpha and omega of that work. It's just that this year he became the epicenter for those issues. He became the lens through which those issues were focused. He became the vehicle through which those issues were pushed onto the public political stage in a way and in a forum which even the corporate Democrats and their corporate media allies could not ignore. They are thrust onto the national political stage in a way, too, which showed a passion for those issues on the part of millions of people, a passion so deep that even the staunchest Clinton bots would have to admit it came fairly close to overcoming the entire Democratic Party establishment and the money bags that back it. Now, make no mistake about this. Those party leaders, that party establishment, now that they feel safe, they will be effusive, even gushing in their praise, in their phony praise of Bernie Sanders. In her victory speech, I can call it that, Clinton lauded Sanders for his extraordinary campaign, for his long career in public service fighting for progressive causes, for having excited millions of voters, and enthused about how the vigorous debate in the primaries has been good for the Democratic Party and for America. That debate, remember, being the very same debate that they actually wanted him to quit and give up on months ago. The amazing Mr. O had his own insincere praise for Bernie Sanders, going on about his energizing millions of Americans with his commitment to issues and the extraordinary work he's done to engage millions of voters. Meanwhile, they will leave to their supporters and surrogates all the sniping and snarling about how Sanders is just being a nasty old meanie by not conceding yet. He's being a sore loser, about how it's his ego, about how he just can't give it up. In fact, one account of his last speech in California referred to him basking and bragging through a speech of striking stubbornness. All of which only goes to prove yet again that these people don't get it. They don't get that Bernie Sanders is not playing the establishment game, that the campaign is not playing the establishment game. He's not going to graciously concede with high praise for his noble opponent and how we have to all join together the way good all establishment candidates are supposed to do, not before the votes are actually cast. Because if you want to help spark a revolution, what you want to do is, if you know you can't actually win that revolution, you want to maximize your leverage, which requires not conceding the fight before you absolutely have to. Before, in this case, the votes are cast. All of this, when it comes down to it, is just part of the enormous pressure that Bernie Sanders is under now to just give up and devote all his energy to, oh my God, not the rump. Which would also mean, by definition, not continuing to talk about the issues he has raised, particularly including those where during the primaries he has forced Clinton to lean left in order to avoid losing too much support. Because those are the issues our elites do not want discussed. But that's exactly what we must not allow to happen. We must not let those issues be brushed aside, quietly dropped from view, but that's what they will do if we let them get away with it. Now, you want some examples of issues they don't want discussed? I'll give you some, but let me say at the top, before I do that the sort of political revolution I envision, which I dream about, goes beyond what Bernie Sanders talks about. So what I'll be talking about here is not my revolution, my issues, my ideas or proposals. I'm going to be talking about those that have been brought up during the course of the primaries, but which are now threatened with being disappeared because too many among our power elite don't want us to be thinking about them. All right, that said, first example, what do you think are the chances that a single-payer national health coverage is going to be a topic in the election that we are now going to have? The Clintonites mocked the idea and mocked Sanders for advocating it. They called it impractical, impossible, pie in the sky, rainbows and unicorns, all despite the fact that the U.S. was and remains virtually the only industrialized nation in the world without a national health system. And no, Obamacare is not that. It is not that. Not even close. Not when, by the estimates of even its most ardent supporters, it will still leave tens of millions of people without health insurance and an unknown number of more with insurance they can't afford to use because of high deductibles and other costs. Obamacare doesn't even provide universal access to health insurance, much less what's really important, which is universal access to health care. But if you hear anything about health care this year, it will be about preserving Obamacare, because that is a debate the economic and political elite of our country is willing to have. Another example, as I've noted before, there's this Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, this secretly negotiated trade deal looking to turn the entire Pacific Rim into a playground for transnational corporations and banks. This is going to be an issue after the election in the lame duck session of Congress. So what do you think are the chances that either campaign or the media will bring any of this up before the election? Do you really think that Hillary Clinton, who once called the TPP the gold standard for trade deals, but turned against it, supposedly and only gradually, in the face of its obvious unpopularity and Sanders' vigorous opposition to it, do you really think she's going to make the TPP part of her campaign? If you do, by the way, remember that Tom Donahue, president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, has said not to worry about what Clinton is saying now about the TPP, because once she is in office, she'll flip back to supporting it. Frankly, if we hear anything about trade, it will be about the supposed millions of jobs free trade has created and will create, with no consideration of the type of jobs you are talking about. Even as evidence shows that living wage jobs, jobs that pay enough to provide for a family, are quickly being replaced by low-wage, less secure jobs, such that, to a degree, such that even the Wall Street Journal admits that, quoting, many middle-wage occupations have collapsed. Because this is all part of the gig economy. This is the latest corporate buzz phrase echoing around the country. We won't have jobs, they say. We'll do gigs. We won't be stuck in traditional jobs with old-fashioned concerns like regular hours, middle-class pay scales, benefits, some job security, and all the other silly traditionals of the workplace. In fact, we won't even have a workplace. In the gig economy, you are liberated to work a series of short-term, low-paying jobs in many places, always being on call through a mobile app on your smartphone or a temp agency. What do you think are the chances the phrase gig economy is going to pass the lips of either Hillary Clinton or Donald the Rump this fall? Meanwhile, income inequality, one of the centerpieces of Bernie Sanders' campaign, and which earlier drove the Occupy movement, which was crushed by some of the same forces now arrayed against the resurgence of those issues which Sanders helped to spark. Income inequality is now the highest in this country it has been since 1928. And it continues to worsen as it has across several decades, including during the administration of the sainted Bill Clinton, who Hillary Clinton now proposes to bring back to manage the economy as part of her administration. Do you really think that? Do you really think income inequality is going to be a centerpiece of the fall campaign? Do you think it will be even addressed in any way other than vapid bromides? Do you think a $15 an hour minimum wage, which Hillary Clinton opposes, is going to come up in this race? A new study, in fact, of the 22 increases in the federal minimum wage between 1938 and 2009, not only showed no correlation between raising the minimum wage and loss of jobs, it actually showed in a substantial majority of the cases there is actually increased employment in the affected areas of the economy. Is that fact going to be part of this debate? What about the fact that despite doomsday predictions, a year after Seattle raised its minimum wage, retail prices had not gone up? Is that going to be part of the debate? Will the moral scourge of poverty be on either candidate's agenda? And since, as I noted last week, our regular media is already prepared to ignore it to make poverty a non-issue, why would the candidates bring it up? Will either the Goppers or the Dems talk about homelessness again in any way more than as a rhetorical device? No, it's generally agreed that to comfortably afford housing, it should take up no more than about 30% of your income. Will either party address the fact that on that basis, as a national average, it takes an income of $20.30 an hour to comfortably afford a two-bedroom apartment at a time when the average hourly wage for Americans is only $15.42? Will they address the fact that there is not a single state in the United States where someone working full-time, year-round at federal minimum wage can comfortably afford even a one-bedroom apartment? Will they talk about how homelessness has long since spread from the cities out into the suburbs such that now school buses can be seen dropping kids off at tents and cars? No, they won't talk about that because they don't want to, and they don't want us thinking about it. Remember concerns about student debt, something else that drove the Occupy movement. What are the chances that that will be a focus of either major party this year? And by the way, I want to make a quick detour here. A couple of minutes ago, I referred to the Occupy movement before, and I referred to it as having been crushed by the same forces now arrayed against what, strictly for convenience, I'll call the Sandras Movement. I want to make it clear that while there actually was evidence of collusion and coordination among federal and local officials on the best ways to break the backs of Occupy encampments, in this case here now, I'm not talking about grand conspiracies, I'm not talking about secret cabals Skyping each other on a regular basis to plan their latest outrages. It's rather the idea of agreement on certain common issues, common values, common ways of viewing the world. This doesn't require conscious coordination. In fact, it doesn't require active coordination at all. What it requires and what it has is a range of powerful interests all heading in much the same direction with much the same attitudes. And with that, let's take a quick break. And here we are back again. Okay, getting back to the issues that we've been talking about that are not going to come up in the fall. Talking about student debt leads directly to something else that Bernie Sanders talked about, but I'll guarantee you is not going to come up. Free college. And in fact, this is not a particularly radical idea. Right now, 12 nations offer college tuition free to their citizens. Argentina, Brazil, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Norway, Scotland, Slovenia, Sweden, and Turkey. And Chile is going to do it next year, making it 13. Now, in last year, Obama proposed a government program to make community college tuition free for students who met certain guidelines and certain academic standards. The Democrats were falling all over themselves with praise. Because that idea, offering some help to some people that wouldn't cost that much or change that much in the grand scheme of things, but which can be made to sound like a great big dramatic advance, that's the kind of debate our political establishment is willing to have. But go beyond that, talk about four-year public colleges being tuition free, talk about something that actually is dramatic, that actually would make a fundamental change in our educational system. Impossible, crazy, you're just promising free stuff. And an idea to be forgotten as soon as the convention lights dim. Okay, and here's something else. See if there's any talk this fall about breaking up the big banks, about doing something about too big to fail. It's something else that Bernie Sanders made one of the centerpieces of his campaign, and something else I guarantee you will not sully the lips of Clinton or the rump. But all that has happened since 2008 is that the big banks have gotten bigger. Just four huge banks, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Citigroup, and JP Morgan Chase, now hold nearly $7 trillion in assets. That is over 40% of the total assets held by all banks in the United States. These banks have continued to grow since 2008. They'll continue to do so. Now, conveniently for the Democrats, the Goppers have now proposed revoking Dodd-Frank, which had already been watered down so much that it was almost irrelevant. But see if this fall there is any discussion about regulating the financial industry, about controlling Wall Street that goes beyond preserve Dodd-Frank, which is another debate the economic establishment is willing to have, while actually fracturing their hold on the economy is not, and so will be off the table. And then there's, if you will, the elephant in the room, campaign finance reform. I noted last week that 80% of the $76 million that Hillary Clinton's super PAC had raised had come from just 20 donors, and that the Hillary Victory Fund had acted essentially as a money laundering scheme to get around limits on campaign contributions. The idea that she will make campaign finance reform a significant part of her campaign, or in fact that she will raise it at all, is frankly laughable. There is so much more. There is so much more that has been raised over these past several months that will now be pushed to the shadows because those that have the power in our society don't want to talk about them, don't want to take them on in any actual way, because to do so would be too much of a challenge to their privileged positions, raise too many uncomfortable questions about our economy, about our society, about our culture. See if either campaign talks about fracking, for example. See how much they talk about immigration reform in any way other than vote pandering. See if they talk about our broken criminal justice system in any way other than vote pandering. See if they bring up Black Lives Matter. See if they talk about police brutality, especially in our minority communities. See if they talk about racism in any way other than platitudes. And frankly, if foreign policy ever comes up, see if it comes up in any form other than terrorist bad U.S. good. None of this will come up. Not national health care, not trade, not income inequality, not poverty, not free college, not breaking up the banks, not Black Lives Matter. None of it. None of it will come up. All of these and more will be dumped in the memory hole, forgotten, ignored, dismissed, except for the occasional passing reference intended to show your deep and abiding concern for the issue without actually committing yourself to doing anything that would make a real change in it. These all will be ignored by the candidates, forgotten by the parties, dismissed by the media, unless we make it impossible for them to do so. Unless we make it impossible for them to ignore, to forget, to dismiss the millions, the tens of millions of people to whom these are not even just issues, they are their passions, they are their lives. There is hope, at least some hope, that, at least to some degree, that may well be the case. A few days ago, the New York Times ran a story about life after Bernie, asking various Sanders supporters what they intended to do now that he had failed to secure the nomination. What struck me most was the fact that most every one of them echoed what I have been saying all along. This was not about Bernie Sanders. It was about the causes that his candidacy represented. It was about the issues, not the person. It was about this political revolution. Which means my question, what now, was answered in various ways, but they all came down to carry it on. Keep fighting, don't give up. For one example, the People's Summit, set for Chicago the week before the Democratic Convention in Philadelphia, which is to be held, interestingly, at the Wells Fargo Center. Apparently, optics was not one of their concerns. The People's Summit has 51 left and labor organizations as partners, and its title is Building the Political Revolution. It is designed specifically to address the question, what now? But still, we face a burden. Still we face, in Martin Luther King's notable phrase from his famous I Have a Dream speech, we face the fierce urgency of now. Still we face the fact that, as I said earlier, the same sort of forces that crushed the Occupy movement by force would crush this resurgence for the passion for justice by wrapping it in a thick cloud of silence, covered over with vague promises of vaguer improvements in the lives of our fellow citizens. It would look to crush the resurgence of passion by feeding us, in another of Dr. King's wonderful phrases, the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. So we must keep on loudly, insistently, defiantly, even rudely, because the issue is not Bernie Sanders. It's not even, in its broadest sense, about the election. It is about, to paraphrase Dr. King, making real the promises of justice. It is about revolution. So to Bernie Sanders, I would commend to him the closing words of Ted Kennedy's address to the 1980 Democratic Convention after he failed to secure the party's nomination. Quoting, "For me, a few hours ago, the campaign came to an end. For all those whose cares had been our concerns, the work goes on, the cause endures, the hope still lives, the dream will never die." And for the rest of us, I would commend the words of the man in the movie. Never give up, never surrender. That's it for this week. Next week, I expect that we'll get back to our more normal sort of things, our more normal sort of procedure. But in the meantime, if you have any reactions, feel free to email me. But in the meantime, now I will just say, as I always do, you have the best week you possibly can, and as always, peace.